at least nobody can deny our existence anymore. We're there. We were right smack on the front page every single day, to the point where we sort of would have been very grateful to be elsewhere for a while. But no one anticipated that kind of intense and sustained focus and controversy on this issue to the exclusion of everything else in the world for weeks, it seemed, at a time. Secondly, I think we're probably guilty of some naivete politically. First of all, for lack of historical perspective, which is not easily done when you're in the middle of an emotional moment, but is important for the long range and for one's own individual emotional survival of any given emotional moment. You've got to have the bigger picture in your mind and some perspective. And second, for forgetting the very nature of the gay community. First of all, in terms of historical perspective, I pointed out frequently during this that, this, as civil rights movements go, this is a brand new one. That is not to deny the extraordinarily courageous men and women who did their thing in preceding years or even decades. But the fact of the matter is that it was over 100 years, for example, between President Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation and President Lyndon Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That took more than a century to bring legal fruition, final legal fruition to that struggle for full civil rights for Americans of color. The first March on Washington for gay and lesbian rights was in 1979. This is a final chapter, I think. This whole struggle of ours is the final chapter, major chapter certainly, in the struggle for civil rights, which is so much of the history of America. But we don't know where we are in that chapter. My guess is we're fairly early in that chapter. That may be the bad news. The good news is that we know the chapter will have a happy ending. We know that this, like all the other chapters in that long struggle, will end victorious. We really will overcome. But I don't know, and I don't know anyone that does know, whether it will be next year or the year after or the next century, which isn't that long away, or what. But we know we're going to win. But it ought not to surprise us that it's going to take a while, that there are going to be casualties in this battle. God knows there already have been lots and lots of casualties, literally and figuratively, and there will be more. And that has always been the price for any struggle worth anything in all of human history. It's going to be a price here. I don't know if I'll live to see it, but I'm quite sure there are people alive today who will live to see it. And it'll be done with. And when it is done, I think the biggest surprise on future generations will be to find out that people ever debated it in the first place. I mean, we always said if you could just integrate the military in this sense, the way President Truman did by a stroke of the pen, in terms of racial integration, people would look around, take a deep breath, say, what was that all about? What happened? I don't see any difference, which is exactly what's going to happen here. Secondly, with regard to the nature of the gay community, the fact of the matter is that most gay men and lesbians don't live in San Francisco or New York or any of our major cities. And not only that, I happen to think that even most of those who do live in our major cities are closeted. We don't know who most of our troops are, and to suggest that one can mount an effective national fundraising and lobbying effort when you cannot identify over 90% of your own people is, I think, naive, and to forget some of the very nature of the problem that we're seeking to redress and to speak to here. I think that makes it terribly important that as we're engaged in what is, in the broadest sense, a political process, to understand that that political process, it's the success of it at least, rests on the ability of each of us individually in our own lives to do what it is we have to do to be comfortable with ourselves to the point where we have sufficient self-respect to go to our elected representatives, whatever level of government, but certainly in Washington. Most gay men and women would never, ever yet dare identify themselves as such to their representatives and senators. We've got, most of my colleagues around here have very rarely encountered gay constituents, at least not until very recently, and in very small numbers. And certainly not to the point where they're beginning to realize that they're in their own families, in their own churches, in their own businesses, in their own schools and colleges. We aren't there yet. We are closer, certainly, each week, each month, each year than we've ever been before. But I think it is still undeniably true that the majority of our folks, for very real and painful and difficult reasons, are not yet confident and strong enough to affirm themselves first to themselves and then to the rest of the world. And until we're able to do that, until we're able literally to stand up for ourselves, I think it's a bit naive to expect a lot of others to be willing to stand up for us in the absence of our being in the front lines ourselves. So we have a long way to go, but we're going to get there, no doubt about it.